Skyrim is known for its massive world, memorable characters, and locations filled with secrets, lore, and huge quest lines. But not everything in the game is unforgettable. In fact, some places and NPCs feel like they exist for almost no reason at all. They're the locations you visit once and immediately forget, or the characters who barely do anything despite being placed in major cities, settlements, or quest areas. No interesting dialogue, no meaningful story, no real impact on the world. Just parts of Skyrim that somehow feel completely empty compared to everything around them. And honestly, that can sometimes make them more noticeable than the important stuff. Because in a game packed with dragons, wars, mysteries, and adventures, running into something painfully bland or pointless stands out immediately. Especially when it feels like the game expected you to care far more than you actually do. Honeystrand Cave is one of the clearest examples in Skyrim of a location that technically serves a purpose while still feeling almost completely pointless and boring once you actually explore it. On paper, it sounds like a fairly standard Skyrim cave, a hidden location tucked away in the wilderness containing hostile creatures, some loot, and environmental storytelling. But unlike many caves in the game that eventually reveal interesting lore, memorable encounters, or unique atmosphere, Honeystrand Cave feels strangely empty from beginning to end. Most players either forget it exists entirely, or only remember it for a handful of practical uses completely unrelated to the cave itself. And honestly, that says a lot about how little personality the location actually has. Because when people talk about Honeystrand Cave, they almost never talk about the cave itself. They talk about farming. That immediately separates it from most memorable Skyrim locations. Even relatively small caves usually contain something players emotionally connect to. A strange story, unsettling environment, difficult enemy encounter, hidden secret, or unique visual design. Honeystrand Cave doesn't really offer any of that. Instead, it exists almost entirely as a functional resource location, remembered primarily because it contains bears. That's it. Bears for pelts, bears for ingredients, bears for souls. And once you realise that, the cave starts feeling less like an actual place within Skyrim's world and more like a utility room players occasionally stop by when they need materials. The location itself certainly doesn't help much. Honeystrand Cave is visually generic, even by Skyrim cave standards. The environment consists mostly of narrow tunnels, basic rocky interiors, and standard wildlife encounters without any strong atmosphere distinguishing it from dozens of other animal dens across the map. There's no striking architecture, no hidden history, no dramatic environmental storytelling. Nothing about the cave feels unique enough to justify remembering it. And in a game like Skyrim, that's a huge problem. Because Skyrim's world is built almost entirely around memorable discovery. Players remember Blackreach because it feels surreal. They remember Forelhost because of the horrifying story hidden inside it. They remember places like Eldergleam Sanctuary because the atmosphere immediately stands apart from everything else around it. Honeystrand Cave doesn't stand apart at all. If anything, it blends into Skyrim so completely that many players accidentally clear it once and then never think about it again for the rest of their playthrough. The only reason it continues getting mentioned online at all is because of the practical value for grinding resources. And even that practicality feels incredibly shallow compared to more interesting locations. The pelt farming aspect is probably the cave's most common use among players, because Honeystrand Cave contains several bears grouped closely together. It becomes an efficient location for gathering bear pelts and other animal materials relatively quickly. That makes it useful for crafting, leveling certain skills, or earning a small amount of gold through selling resources. But the issue is that this usefulness has almost nothing to do with the cave itself as a designed experience. Players aren't visiting Honeystrand Cave because it's interesting. They're visiting because it's efficient. and efficiency alone rarely creates memorable gameplay in Skyrim. If anything, it often does the opposite. Once a location becomes associated purely with grinding or farming, it starts losing any sense of atmosphere or immersion entirely. Honeystrand Cave suffers heavily from that problem because the cave never offers enough narrative or environmental depth to balance out its mechanical function. So eventually it just becomes the bare cave, a resource stop, nothing more. The alchemy aspect reinforces this issue further. Bears provide useful alchemy ingredients like bear claws, which have legitimate value for potion crafting and skill progression. As a result, some players specifically revisit Honeystrand Cave repeatedly to harvest ingredients efficiently. Again though, this doesn't make the cave interesting, it makes it convenient. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Convenience can keep a location relevant mechanically, but it rarely creates emotional attachment or memorable exploration. Honeystrand Cave doesn't contain fascinating alchemical lore or unique ingredient combinations hidden within the environment. It simply contains creatures that drop ingredients players may want, at a low level. That's an incredibly thin identity for a Skyrim location, especially considering how rich and atmospheric many other caves in the game are by comparison. Even the grand soul farming aspect, arguably the cave's most genuinely useful feature, still reinforces how transactional the entire location feels. Since cave bears provide grand souls, when trapped properly, Honeystrand Cave becomes valuable to players looking to recharge enchanted gear or level enchanting efficiency. And once again, the cave itself becomes secondary to what players can extract from it. That pattern defines the entire location. Honeystrand Cave isn't explored because people care about what it is. It's revisited because of what players can harvest from it. That creates a very strange relationship between the player and the environment compared to most Skyrim locations. Usually, even smaller caves at least attempt to create some kind of story or atmosphere around the enemies and setting. Honeystrand Cave barely bothers. There's almost no emotional hook attached to the place at all. No mystery, no tragedy, no memorable NPC, no unique encounter. You walk in, kill bears, collect materials, and leave. And the game never really pretends there's more depth there than that. Compared to other wildlife dens in Skyrim, Honeystrand Cave somehow manages to feel even emptier because of how little environmental storytelling exists inside it. Places like Frostflow Lighthouse or Bloated Man's Grotto use natural environments to support larger emotional or narrative ideas. Honeystrand Cave feels mechanically assembled rather than meaningfully designed. A cave, some bears, loot containers, and you're done. That simplicity wouldn't necessarily be a problem if the atmosphere itself carried weight. But it doesn't. The cave lacks strong visual identity almost entirely. There's no eerie lighting, unusual structure, hidden lore implications, or dramatic encounter waiting deeper inside. The experience remains exactly what it appears to be from the moment you enter. And in Skyrim, predictability often translates directly into forgettability. That's really the core issue with Honeystrand Cave. Nothing unexpected happens there, at any point. The cave never evolves emotionally or mechanically beyond its initial presence. Once you recognize it as a resource farming location, every future visit becomes purely transactional. You stop engaging with the environment as a place within Skyrim's world and start treating it like a checklist. Need pelts? You go there. Need claws? You also go there. And if you need grand souls, you also go to Honeystrand Cave. And once you've gathered what you need, the cave immediately loses relevance again. That temporary usefulness creates a strange emptiness around the location because it never develops any lasting emotional identity. Players remember using Honeystrand Cave, but very few remember experiencing it in the way they remember Skyrim's stronger locations. Even the name feels oddly forgettable despite sounding distinctive initially. Honeystrand Cave suggests something potentially atmospheric or unusual, maybe tied to wildlife behaviour or hidden natural beauty. Instead, it's just another animal cave with very little personality beyond its resource efficiency. That disconnect between the name and the actual experience almost makes the location feel unfinished somehow, like it was originally intended to have more depth that never fully materialised. And unfortunately, Skyrim contains quite a few places like that. Locations that technically function correctly, but feel creatively empty compared to the richness surrounding them elsewhere in the game. Honeystrand Cave just happens to be one of the clearest examples because its practical uses are so much more memorable than the cave itself. Most players who remember it positively do so for grinding purposes, not because they enjoyed exploring it. That distinction matters enormously when discussing pointless locations in Skyrim. A place doesn't necessarily need major lore or quests to feel worthwhile. Small caves can still succeed through atmosphere, tension, visual design, or environmental storytelling. Honeystrand Cave barely attempts any of those things. It exists almost entirely at the mechanical level, and because of that, it ultimately feels less like a real location and more like a tool hidden on the map for players who know how to exploit its resources efficiently. Which is why so many people forget it exists the moment they stop needing bare materials. Because once the farming value disappears, there's almost nothing left to remember. No emotional connection, no mystery, no meaningful story, just a small cave in the wilderness filled with animals players eventually reduce to crafting ingredients and soul gems. And honestly, that might be the most boring thing a Skyrim location can become. Rune is one of the loneliest characters in Skyrim because everything about him feels incomplete. His past, his identity, even his role within the Thieves Guild all carry this lingering sense that something important is missing. And unlike many mysterious NPCs in Skyrim, whose unanswered questions make them seem powerful or dangerous, Rune's mystery feels sad. The more you learn about him, the more obvious it becomes that he's a person desperately trying to understand where he belongs in a world that never gave him clear answers. The loneliness defines almost every aspect of his character. Even the way players first encounter him reflects this. The Ragged Flagon is supposed to feel like a place full of camaraderie and criminal brotherhood, a hidden refuge beneath Riften where thieves gather together away from the rest of Skyrim. Yet despite constantly being around guild members, Rune still feels emotionally isolated from everyone around him. Most members of the Thieves Guild have strong identities tied to their pasts or personalities. Dalvin has stories and connections everywhere. Vex thrives on confidence and reputation. Brynjolf carries authority within the guild itself. Rune feels quieter, detached, like someone who exists around the group rather than fully inside it. And that feeling becomes much stronger once he begins talking about his past. Because Rune doesn't know who he really is. That single detail immediately separates him from almost every other NPC in Skyrim. Most characters in the game are deeply rooted in history, family, race, politics, or personal goals. Even minor NPCs usually know where they came from and how they ended up where they are. Rune doesn't. He was discovered as a child alone at sea, rescued near the coast with nothing identifying him except a rune-covered stone he carried with him. No family, no explanation, no memory of where he came from or why he was abandoned. Just an object that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. And the tragic part is that the mystery never gets solved. Well, not really. That unresolved backstory is one of the biggest reasons he feels so lonely compared to the other Skyrim characters. His entire life has been shaped by a question he can never fully answer. The rune itself becomes symbolic of that emptiness, a clue that should mean something important, yet ultimately leads nowhere. And you can hear the exhaustion in the way he talks about it. Rune doesn't speak like someone excited by mystery. He speaks like someone worn down by it. That distinction matters because Skyrim usually treats mysterious backstories as exciting opportunities for adventure or discovery. Rune's story avoids that completely. There's no hidden prophecy waiting for him, no dramatic revelation, no long-lost family returning at the perfect moment. There's just uncertainty, permanent uncertainty. And over time, that uncertainty clearly damaged his sense of identity. That's what makes his loneliness feel so grounded emotionally. Rune isn't isolated physically. He lives among the Thieves Guild, surrounded by people constantly talking, planning jobs, and moving through the Ragged Flagon. But emotionally, he feels disconnected from all of them because he lacks the foundation most people build their lives around. He doesn't know where he came from. He doesn't know who abandoned him. He doesn't even know what the rune itself truly means. And because of that, Rune constantly gives the impression of someone searching for meaning he's already starting to believe he'll never find. The Thieves Guild itself amplifies this sadness in subtle ways. The guild is filled with damaged people, criminals, and outsiders, but most of them still possess strong personalities or ambitions that give them direction. Rune doesn't really have that. He participates in guild life, but there's always a sense that he's drifting through it rather than fully committing emotionally, almost like he ended up there because there was nowhere else to go. That aimlessness makes him stand out even inside a group of social outcasts. And the stone itself becomes strangely haunting the longer you think about it. Skyrim introduces it like the beginning of a major mystery, yet deliberately refuses to provide closure. Players naturally expect some hidden meaning or future payoff attached to the object. Maybe it ties to an ancient civilization, a forgotten family, or some larger piece of Elder Scrolls lore, but nothing ever comes. The rune remains unresolved, and so does Rune himself. That lack of resolution is incredibly important to why his character feels so lonely. In most fantasy stories, mystery exists to eventually create answers. Rune's mystery exists to reinforce absence instead. Every unanswered question surrounding him becomes another reminder that he has no connection to his own past, no roots, no certainty, no place where he fully belongs. Even his personality reflects this emotional detachment. Compared to louder Thieves Guild members, Rune comes across as restrained and introspective. He isn't charismatic like Brynjolf or sarcastic like Vex. He speaks carefully, almost cautiously at times, as though he's spent most of his life observing rather than connecting deeply with people. And honestly, that makes sense. Someone raised without identity or belonging would naturally struggle to feel grounded socially. The tragedy is that Rune clearly wants answers. His dialogue reveals genuine frustration and curiosity about his origins, but there's also resignation underneath it. You get the sense that he spent years chasing fragments of information that never led anywhere meaningful. At some point, the search stopped feeling hopeful and started feeling empty. That emotional exhaustion gives Rune a realism many Skyrim NPCs lack. His loneliness doesn't come from dramatic trauma or catastrophic events. It comes from absence, from never fully knowing where he belongs in the world. And because there's no clear enemy or event to blame, the sadness surrounding him feels strangely permanent. There's no obvious way to fix his life, no quest line waiting to resolve his pain. He simply continues existing inside the Ragged Flagon, carrying unanswered questions nobody around him can help solve. And the rest of the guild barely seems to notice how isolated he actually is. That's another subtle detail that makes his character feel tragic. The Thieves Guild presents itself as a family in many ways, especially after the player helps restore it. Yet Rune still feels emotionally alone within the group. People know him, work beside him, and acknowledge him casually, but nobody seems capable of helping him confront the deeper emptiness surrounding his identity. Because ultimately they can't. The answers he wants don't exist within the guild. They may not exist anywhere. Compared to other lonely NPCs in Skyrim, Rune stands out because his isolation feels internal rather than external. Characters living alone in cabins or wandering roads are physically separated from society. Rune is surrounded by people constantly, yet still feels disconnected emotionally. That kind of loneliness often feels worse, because there's no obvious solution to it. Even the player becomes guild master and spends extensive time around the Thieves Guild. Rune never really changes. He doesn't discover his family, he doesn't uncover some hidden destiny. His life simply continues in uncertainty. And somehow that realism makes him one of the saddest characters in Skyrim. Because not every mystery gets solved. Not every person finds closure. Sometimes people simply carry unanswered questions for their entire lives. Rune embodies that idea perfectly. Even the fact that players remember him primarily because of his unresolved backstory reinforces the tragedy surrounding him. His entire identity revolves around something missing. Remove the mystery, and there's almost nothing left for people to hold on to about him. That's devastating when you really think about it. A man defined more by what he lacks than by what he actually is. And yet, despite all of that, Rune still keeps going. He continues working, talking, surviving, and existing within the world, even without the answers he desperately wants. There's something quietly heartbreaking about that persistence. He never becomes bitter or cruel because of his loneliness, just tired, quietly tired. And that's what ultimately makes Rune one of the loneliest NPCs in Skyrim. Not because he lives alone, not because he's forgotten physically, but because his entire life is built around an emptiness nobody, not even the player, can truly fill. A man carrying a mystery that never leads him anywhere. An outsider even among outsiders themselves. And someone who spends every day surrounded by people while still feeling completely disconnected from the one thing he wants most. A sense of where he truly came from. Sildar the Unseen is one of the loneliest NPCs in Skyrim because she exists in a city full of people while somehow feeling completely invisible to all of them. Windhelm is one of the largest and busiest cities in the game, packed with soldiers, merchants, labourers, nobles, refugees, guards, and constant political tension surrounding the civil war. There's always movement in Windhelm, conversations echo through the streets, arguments break out in marketplaces, workers haul cargo through the Grey Quarter, and crowds gather around public executions or taverns late into the night. And in the middle of all that life, Sildar wanders alone, cold, hungry, almost completely ignored. That contrast is what makes her so sad to look at once you really pay attention to her. Skyrim often portrays loneliness through physical isolation, characters living in remote cabins, hidden caves, or distant wilderness camps, far away from civilization. Sildar's loneliness feels worse because she's surrounded by civilization constantly, yet nobody truly notices or cares about her existence. She's right there in the open streets of Windhelm every single day, and somehow she still feels forgotten. The environment itself makes her situation especially brutal. Windhelm is easily one of the harshest cities in Skyrim to survive in. The cold dominates everything here. Snow and ice cover the streets permanently. The stone architecture feels bleak and unwelcoming. And the atmosphere of the city constantly carries tension and exhaustion. Even wealthy NPCs in Windhelm often seem unhappy or worn down by the environment around them. For someone like Sildar, the city must feel unbearable. She has no proper home, no real protection, no family or support system visible anywhere in the game. Instead, she survives by begging on frozen streets while the rest of the city moves around her as though she's part of the scenery. And honestly, that might be the most depressing part of her character. Sildar doesn't feel hated, she feels overlooked. That's an important distinction because it changes the emotional tone surrounding her completely. Windhelm is full of prejudice, conflict, and hostility, but Sildar exists beneath even that level of attention. Most NPCs don't actively attack her or insult her. They simply ignore her existence almost entirely. She drifts through the city asking for coins while people continue their routines without even stopping. That kind of social invisibility creates a very different type of loneliness than outright rejection, because it suggests people stopped seeing her as a person a long time ago. Even her title, The Unseen, reinforces this perfectly. On the surface, the nickname sounds almost mystical, like the title of a rogue or mage. But the reality behind it is actually much sadder. Silda is unseen because society barely acknowledges her anymore. She's become part of the background of Windhelm itself, a fixture rather than an individual. And the game quietly reinforces this every time players walk past her without stopping to think about her situation. What makes Silda especially tragic compared to other beggars in Skyrim is that she clearly wasn't always living this way. Through dialogue, she hints at having once been involved with pickpocketing and criminal activity, using stealth and survival skills to get by. There's an implication that she adapted to harsh circumstances over time rather than simply being born into poverty. That history adds another layer to her loneliness because it suggests decline. A life that slowly narrowed until begging in Windhelm became all she had left. And unlike thieves in the Ragged Flagon or criminals tied to larger factions, Silda has no community surrounding her. She exists entirely on her own, isolated even within one of Skyrim's most populated cities. The cold environment amplifies this isolation constantly. Windhelm never feels emotionally warm, even in its busiest moments. The city's architecture is imposing and ancient, its streets dark and icy, its atmosphere dominated by grief, racism, war anxiety, and exhaustion. There's very little softness anywhere in Windhelm. For someone already lonely, it becomes one of the worst possible places imaginable, and Silda has nowhere else to go. That permanence is what makes her situation feel especially hopeless. Many NPCs in Skyrim travel, work, join factions, or pursue goals that might eventually change their circumstances. Silda's routines feel static. She wanders the same freezing streets every day, asking strangers for coins, trapped in a cycle that clearly isn't leading anywhere better. The city simply absorbs her suffering into its normal rhythm. Compared to beggars in other cities, Silda's situation feels uniquely harsh because Windhelm itself lacks the small comforts present elsewhere. Whiterun has warmth and openness, Solitude has wealth and relative stability, Riften has corruption, but also energy and social interaction. Windhelm feels emotionally exhausted, and Silda embodies the human cost buried underneath that exhaustion. Even the people around her reinforce her isolation indirectly. Windhelm's citizens are consumed by their own problems constantly. Civil war politics, racial tensions, economic struggles, murders, survival. Nobody seems emotionally available enough to truly notice someone quietly falling apart in the streets around them. And because of that, Silda becomes strangely symbolic of Windhelm itself. A person surviving in brutal conditions, while the world slowly stops acknowledging her existence. The saddest part is that she still tries. There's no bitterness or aggression dominating her personality despite everything. She continues asking for help politely, continues surviving however she can, continues existing despite the complete lack of stability in her life. That persistence makes her loneliness feel even heavier, because you can tell she hasn't fully given up emotionally, but she's clearly exhausted, and Skyrim captures that exhaustion subtly through her routines and dialogue. Silda doesn't carry dramatic tragedy around her the way some NPCs do. There's no huge questline tied to her suffering, no major revelation waiting beneath the surface, just quiet hardship, day after day. That realism is what makes her stand out emotionally. Many lonely characters in fantasy settings are isolated for dramatic reasons: curses, prophecies, betrayals, wars. Silda feels lonely in a painfully ordinary way. She's poor, aging, vulnerable, and largely ignored by society. And that kind of loneliness often feels more believable than grand tragedies, because people like Silda exist in real life too. The fact that she's located especially in Windhelm matters enormously as well, because the city itself constantly reinforces themes of exclusion and neglect. Refugees are marginalised in the Grey Quarter, the poor struggle visibly, violence and prejudice simmer beneath daily life. Silda becomes another example of how Windhelm allows suffering to become normalised over time. People stop reacting to it, stop noticing, until eventually someone like Silda becomes part of the environment rather than a person in crisis. That's why her nickname feels so devastating once you actually think about it long enough. The Unseen isn't just a title, it's actually her reality. And even the player often contributes to that unintentionally. Most players pass Silda countless times throughout a playthrough without learning much about her. She blends into Windhelm's atmosphere so naturally that it's easy to overlook her entirely unless you deliberately stop and pay attention, which mirrors exactly how the city treats her. That subtle design is what makes her one of Skyrim's most effective lonely NPCs. The game doesn't force emotional attention onto her, it simply places her there and allows players to decide whether they notice her humanity or not. And many players never do. Compared to characters like Rune, whose loneliness revolves around identity and unanswered questions, Silda's loneliness feels more immediate and physical. She isn't searching for truths or lost origins. She's trying to survive another freezing day in a city that barely acknowledges her existence. And somehow that simplicity makes her even sadder, because there's no mystery to solve, no dramatic revelation waiting underneath the surface. Just a lonely old woman wandering one of Skyrim's coldest cities, while crowds move around her without truly seeing her at all. That's what ultimately makes Silda the Unseen one of the loneliest NPCs in Skyrim. Not because she lives far away from civilization, but because she lives right in the middle of it and still feels completely alone. A forgotten figure swallowed by Windhelm's ice, noise and indifference. Still walking the streets every day, still asking to be noticed, and slowly becoming exactly what her name suggests. Someone the world learned not to see anymore. Skyrim is a land of grand adventure, from the towering spires of the College of Winterhold to the bloody back alleys of Riften. Each city feels like a living, breathing piece of history. And then there's one city that doesn't have any of this. And that city is Falkreath. Falkreath is the kind of place that makes you wonder why Bethesda even put it in the game. It's not dramatic like Solitude, it's not seedy like Riften, it's not even charming like Whiterun. It just kind of exists, like a fantasy cul-de-sac no one asked for. To understand how useless Falkreath is, we have to understand what it's supposed to be. Falkreath is a small hold nestled in Skyrim's piney southern border, known mostly for its graveyard, gloomy weather, and the general sense that something interesting almost happened there once, but then it didn't. It's surrounded by dense forest, giving it a spooky, misty atmosphere. You might think this sets the stage for mystery, conflict, or intrigue, and it could, if literally anything happened there. Falkreath is basically the fantasy equivalent of a sleepy retirement town, except instead of bingo nights and golf carts, you get talking dogs and passive-aggressive Nords. The Jarl is the reigning noble of Falkreath. You'd think being a Jarl means he has vision, strength, or at least a cool hat. But no. The Jarl is the most indifferent, nepotistic, and lazy Jarl in all of Skyrim. This man will literally make you chop wood to earn his respect. Not slay a dragon, not defend the town, no. Chop wood. Like a Skyrim-themed summer camp counselor who never got promoted. Even worse, his only real goal is to impress his uncle and curry favour with the Empire. That's it. His moral compass, non-existent. His ambition, minimal. His leadership style, delegating every single thing to you, the player. Because apparently the only qualification for being Thane in Falkreath is having a pulse. And even if you do become Thane, what's your reward? A generic housecarl named Raya, who is as forgettable as a loaf of stale gnawed bread? and a plot of land where your neighbours are wolves and undead spriggans. Skyrim's towns are usually defined by their people. Whiterun has the Battleborns and the Greymanes. Windhelm has the cruel Nords and the struggling Dunmer. Riften has Maven Blackbriar and the entire Thieves Guild. Falkreath has Nenya? She exists mostly to tell you that the Jarl is busy or to warn you not to make trouble. That's it. She has the personality of a brick wall and the charisma of wet parchment. Then there's Lod, the town blacksmith. He starts a quest by telling you about a talking dog. That's it. That's his entire contribution to society. He hears a voice in the woods, and instead of assuming he's going insane or there's danger involved, he just shrugs and asks you to go check it out. And for most of the other residents, forgettable shopkeepers, grumpy old men, generic guards. There's one guy who tends to the graveyard, and honestly, he has the most character development of anyone in the town, which is saying way too much as it is. Now let's talk about quests, because that's where the town shines, right? Wrong. In Falkreath, the quests are either insultingly basic or completely unhinged. Let's start with a Daedra's best friend. You meet Barbas, a talking dog, and it sounds like a fun, quirky Daedra quest, until you realise it's 90% just walking across the entire map, to a cave in Harfinger, and then back again. Nothing happens in between. No ambushes, no twists, just a dog that won't shut up and a Daedra who gives you one of the worst rewards in a game unless you make the evil choice. All of this thanks to the Lacksmith, Falkreath's shining beacon of productivity. Then there's the Dark Brotherhood questline, which starts in Falkreath's jail. And while yes, this eventually leads to some of the best content in the game, Falkreath's contribution is a locked door and a child who wants you to commit murder. That's it. Falkreath is just a glorified crime tipster, a Yelp review for assassinations. The rest of the quests: kill some bandits, deliver a letter, help someone bury their dog. None of it really matters, and none of it changes anything. Let's zoom out for a second. What is Falkreath Hold for? It's not a major trading hub, it's not a military outpost, it's not home to any unique factions, major NPCs, or strategic resources. Even lore-wise, it's just kind of there. Its most notable feature is its graveyard. And that's not me just being flippant. Falkreath is literally famous for being where people go to die. You know how in every fantasy setting, there's that one place that seems like a filler the developers added because the map needed symmetry? That's Falkreath. It's Skyrim's other town. Not quite important enough to cut, and not interesting enough to highlight. It doesn't even have a decent economy. The shops carry basic gear, the inn is perpetually empty, and no one has any real goals beyond surviving the fog and not annoying the Jarl too much. And then there's the Hearthfire DLC. Yes, you can build a house near Falkreath. In theory, this should give the town more relevance. Maybe you'd be invested in the community. Maybe it'd feel like a second home. But no. Building a house in Falkreath is like building a mansion in the middle of a haunted forest. The land is infested with bears and necromancers. Your house is constantly under attack. There are no neighbours, and the nearest shop is a 10-minute horse ride away. Even the housecarls don't seem to care. They'll fight off a giant, then go right back to staring blankly into the woods like they're remembering a better town. If Hearthfire was supposed to make Falkreath feel like a place worth investing in, it fails spectacularly. All it does is highlight how little there is to work with. Falkreath has the unique distinction of being the only town in Skyrim that seems completely unaware it's part of a massive world-shaping RPG. While other cities are embroiled in political drama, ancient secrets, or divine prophecy, Falkreath is just chilling. It's like someone hit pause on development and forgot to come back. NPCs here have the dialogue range of a soggy napkin. No ambitions, no opinions, just vague comments about the weather, or who recently died, which to be fair is a lot of people. But even that should be interesting. Falkreath has a graveyard the size of a small village. That could lead to all kinds of stories: necromancers, haunted pasts, family feuds. Instead, it's just a gloomy lawn with zero narrative payoff. You'd think a town surrounded by wolves, vampires, and undead would have at least one cool local legend. Nope. No ghost stories, no cursed relics, not even a weird guy yelling about the end of times. Just Lod and his sentient dog problem. Even the town layout screams we gave up halfway. But it's not even worth exploring. You can see everything Falkreath has to offer in the time it takes to shout a guard off a bridge. It's not just that Falkreath is boring, it's that it feels like it was supposed to be more, but someone left early for lunch and never came back. Now, to be fair, Falkreath could have been interesting. Its southern location could have made it a hotbed for border skirmishes. Its vast forests could have harboured secret cults, ancient ruins, or dangerous wildlife. It could have been a druidic centre, a logging empire, or a rogue's hideout. Instead, it's a sleepy town with a graveyard, a moody jarl, and a dog that drags you half a way across the map for nothing. Even its aesthetic, moody pine forest, perpetual mist, sets the stage for mystery and danger. But nothing ever happens. It's like the devs planted all the seeds for greatness and then forgot to water them. Now look, I'm not saying Falkreath shouldn't exist. I'm not here to bully a sleepy little forest town into extinction. In fact, there's a weird charm to how empty and quiet it is. Not every place in Skyrim needs to be a political powder keg or the backdrop for the world-ending events. Sometimes a town is just a town. But when you stack it up against the rest of Skyrim, the power struggles of Solitude, the corruption of Riften, the chaos of Windhelm, Falkreath just doesn't hold up. It's less of a capital hold, and more like a scenic rest stop with the delusions of grandeur. In the end, Falkreath isn't just the most useless town in Skyrim. It's a monument to wasted potential. Compared to the likes of Riften, Whiterun, and Solitude, it just doesn't hold up. A foggy, forested disappointment where nothing of value happens, and no one of consequence lives. But beneath all that, if you happen to come by Falkreath, you might just be delighted with how quiet and empty it actually is. I know I've hated on it a lot, but it does act as a rest from the action of Skyrim. So maybe with Falkreath's failures, it might have actually turned out to be something worthwhile. Skyrim is a land shaped by mountains, rivers, and the footsteps of countless travellers who have carved paths into its landscape. Roads connect its cities, linking Whiterun's trade to Windhelm's politics, Solitude's grandeur to Riften's shadows. Yet not all roads in Skyrim serve this purpose. Some wind away from civilization, bending into empty valleys or climbing barren cliffs before fading into nothing. They are not shortcuts, nor do they connect important places. They are remnants, curiosities, silent paths that seem to lead nowhere at all. These roads are easy to miss. They branch off from main highways, unmarked, their cobblestone crumbling or swallowed by snow. A curious dragonborn may wander them, expecting to find a cave, a settlement, or a quest. Instead, they discover isolation, stretches of dirt and stone that vanish into the wild without explanation. Why do these roads exist? Were they once thriving trade routes, now abandoned by time? Did they once lead to settlements erased by war, plague, or the brutal climate of Skyrim? Or are they simply world-building flourishes, designed to make the province feel older, vaster, and lonelier? Winterhold is already a city marked by loss. Once the centre of culture and learning in Skyrim, it was shattered by the Great Collapse. Its buildings and people swallowed by the Sea of Ghosts. Today, only a handful of structures remain, clinging desperately to cliffs. North of the ruined hold runs a road that seems to stretch away into emptiness. It follows the edge of the frozen sea, winding across snow-covered cliffs before abruptly ending. There are no mines, no caves, no shrines, just an icy expanse and the relentless sound of waves battering the ice. This road feels symbolic. Perhaps it once led to coastal villages now claimed by the collapse. Perhaps it was a fisherman's route, carrying catches to the city that no longer thrive. Now all that remains is a road to nowhere, echoing the fate of Winterhold itself, a reminder of what was lost and cannot be reclaimed. The Reach is one of Skyrim's most dangerous holds, a land of jagged cliffs and forsworn ambushes. Its main roads connect Markarth to the rest of Skyrim, but scattered through the mountains are strange trails, roads carved into the stone that lead only to sheer drops or dead ends. One such road begins outside Karth Waston. At first, it looks like a path to another mining camp or hidden valley, but after a grueling climb filled with switchbacks and crumbling rocks, the road simply ends at a narrow plateau overlooking the river. No cave, no ruin, no camp, just silence. This kind of path embodies the mystery of the Reach. Perhaps it was once used by forsworn tribes, or by ancient Nords who built shrines long since destroyed. Or perhaps it is nothing more than an abandoned attempt at expansion, a settlement that never came to be. For the player, the climb feels eerie. You expect reward, but find only the indifferent beauty of the Reach, a reminder that not all journeys end with discovery. The Pale is a hold defined by endless snowdrifts and roads buried under frost. Between Dawnstar and Winterhold, the region is littered with half-roads, faint lines in the snow that appear to lead somewhere, but dissolve into white nothingness. One of the most notable begins near Snowpoint Beacon. A trail branches off from the main path, climbing into the mountains. It seems to promise a fort or ruin, yet it delivers only a ridge overlooking the Sea of Ghosts. The wind howls, the snow falls, and the Dragonborn is left standing on a cliff with no purpose but to feel the cold. These snowy trails highlight Skyrim's inhospitable nature. In other provinces, a road without a destination would be unusual. But in the Pale, where survival is tenuous, it makes sense that some routes were abandoned. Perhaps they once connected logging camps or military outposts during the Great War, but now they're just long forgotten. The result is a landscape where the land itself erases human effort. Roads disappear not because of design, but because the snow demands it. Skyrim's northern coastline is filled with strange paths that end in icy water. Some can be found near Dawnstar or Solitude, where half-roads snake across rocks before plunging into the sea. At first, they feel like mistakes, remnants of unfinished designs, but when you consider Skyrim's culture, they make more sense. Nords are seafarers. They build longboats, raid, and fish. These coastal trails likely once led to docks or villages destroyed by storms or abandoned after the Great Collapse. Now when the player follows them, they find only the waves lapping against ruined stone. Sometimes a half-sunken ship hints at their purpose. Other times the emptiness is total. These roads serve as ghostly reminders that Skyrim's coast is as deadly as its mountains. They are roads not to destinations, but to absences, paths leading to the memory of lives swallowed by the sea. Falkreath is one of Skyrim's quieter holds, a town surrounded by forests and graveyards. Yet even here, among the relative peace, there are roads that go nowhere. Behind Falkreath, a small road winds into the forest, appearing at first to lead to a farmstead, but instead it just ends abruptly in a thicket of trees. There is no landmark, no ruin, not even a bandit camp, just silence. This road reflects Falkreath's themes of mortality and memory. It feels as though it once connected to a home now erased, leaving only the path as a ghost. In a town already obsessed with death, such a road deepens the atmosphere of loss. The question remains, why would the designers of Skyrim include so many roads that lead nowhere? Part of the answer is immersion. Roads that are a dead end, trails that fade, and paths that vanish into wilderness make Skyrim feel ancient. They suggest that the province has a history beyond the player's quests. Villages destroyed, routes abandoned, and lives forgotten. Another reason is atmosphere. These roads give the player moments of silence, times when exploration doesn't end in reward but in reflection. They remind us that Skyrim is not a theme park. It is a land shaped by time and tragedy, where not every story survives. Finally, they exist to spark imagination. A road that leads nowhere is a story prompt, an invitation for players to wonder, who built this, where did it lead, Why is it abandoned? Skyrim thrives on mystery, and these roads are just a part of that design. While caves and dungeons tell explicit stories through loot and enemies, roads tell subtler ones. It hints at trade, at pilgrimage, at survival struggles now forgotten. The road north of Winterhold speaks of collapse. The road in the Reach speaks of abandoned settlements. The coastal trails speak of seafaring lost to storms. Each isolated path deepens Skyrim's world building without even saying a word. This is Skyrim's genius. Even its emptiest spaces feel alive with history. Roads are not just routes for players, they are artifacts of the world itself. The most haunting are the ones that end mid-journey. A trail climbing a cliff, ending before it reaches the top. A cobblestone road breaking off into dirt, then vanishing entirely. These roads feel so isolated. They are not finished, not destroyed, just left behind. The isolated roads of Skyrim may go nowhere, but they are not meaningless. They embody the province's themes of ruin, survival, and mystery. They remind the player that not every journey is rewarded, and not every story is remembered. They are quiet, forgotten, sometimes frustrating. But they are also beautiful. In their emptiness, they reflect the harsh reality of Skyrim, that this is a world where people vanish, civilizations collapse, and roads outlive those who walk them. The most isolated roads in Skyrim lead nowhere, but in doing so, they lead us deeper into the heart of what makes the province unforgettable. Across the wind-swept plains of the Whiterun Hold, where the tundra stretches endlessly beneath a pale sky, there grows something that should not exist. A tree. But not just any tree. Its bark shimmers faintly with violet light. Its roots twist through stone and ash, and its sap, known as the sleeping tree sap, induces dreams so vivid they blur the line between reality and illusion. The sleeping tree, found at Sleeping Tree Camp, is one of the most mysterious landmarks in Skyrim. No lore explains it fully. No scholar agrees on where it came from. Some say it was a piece of the mythical Tower of Nirn, torn loose during the creation of the world. Others whisper it fell from the stars, a fragment of Hermaeus Mora's realm. Or perhaps the remnant of a giant's dream that took root in the waking world. It is both beautiful and unsettling, alive yet alien, and that is what makes it Skyrim's most mysterious place. The Sleeping Tree Camp lies west of Whiterun, nestled between the plains and the mountains. The camp itself is simple, a few giant tents, a cooking fire, and at its heart, the glowing tree itself. The giants who inhabit the camp seem to worship or protect it. Unlike their kin, it's as if even they understand that this tree is sacred or dangerous. The landscape around the tree seems changed by its presence. The ground is oddly coloured, the grass is sparse, and the air is faintly hazy, as though the world itself is holding its breath. There is no sound of wind here, no bird song, only the faint hum of something ancient, something that doesn't quite belong. The most bizarre and defining feature of the sleeping tree is its sap, a rare substance that can be collected in vials. It glows faintly purple, and when consumed, it grants the drinker immense vitality and strength at a cost. The sleeping tree sap temporarily increases stamina and resistance, but also induces a stale, dreamlike fog. Users report hallucinations, strange visions, and in extreme cases, unconsciousness. Some suggest that the tree feeds on these dreams, that it drinks the consciousness of those who taste its essence. In Skyrim's world, where potions and alchemy are commonplace, the sap stands apart. It doesn't behave like a natural mixture, it feels alive. There are even merchants in Whiterun who seek to trade in the sap, implying that this bizarre substance has become part of Skyrim's underground economy. Half medicine, half narcotic. Its effects blur the line between reality and dream, and the source of that power only deepens the mystery of the tree itself. Scholars and travellers have long debated where the sleeping tree came from. Each theory is stranger than the last. Some claim that the sleeping tree was born of a meteor, a seed carried through the void that crashed into Skyrim long ago. Its otherworldly glow and unnatural resilience seem to support this theory. If true, it would mean the tree is not of Nirn at all, but a relic of another realm, or another world entirely. Others believe it was flung into the air during the eruption of Red Mountain, carried by divine or Daedric forces before landing in Whiterun's tundra. The reddish hue of its roots, reminiscent of volcanic glass, could support this origin. Perhaps the most chilling theory ties it to Hermaeus Mora herself, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge and Fate. The tree's alien appearance and dream-inducing sap mirror the strange, organic structures seen in Mora's realm. If so, the tree could be a tendril from that realm, reaching into Skyrim to observe or corrupt the minds of mortals. None of these explanations are confirmed. They might never be. And that's what makes the sleeping tree so fascinating. It resists understanding. It refuses to fit neatly into Skyrim's known mythology. Perhaps the most peculiar aspect of the sleeping tree is not the tree itself, but its guardian. The giant who lives here does not attack on sight. This is almost unheard of in Skyrim, where giants fiercely protect their mammoths and territory. But if you do get too close, just be wary that you will be sent into the sky like I did. Yet at the sleeping tree they are calm. Some travellers believe these giants are dream-bound, enslaved by the tree's sap. Their somewhat gentle behaviour could be the result of constant exposure to its hallucinogenic power, leaving them in a state of perpetual trance. Others believe they are its chosen protectors, creatures who understand the tree's cosmic importance in a way mortals cannot. Whatever the truth, the relationship between the giant and the tree only adds to the camp's eerie mystique. It is a place of peace, yes, but peace of a strange, unnatural kind. In Whiterun, you may encounter Ysolda, an ambitious trader with dreams of independence. She asks the Dragonborn to collect sleeping tree sap for her, implying that she already has connections to its distribution. Her request opens a window into an unsettling truth. The sap is not just a curiosity, it's a commodity. If she is willing to buy it, that means someone is selling it. Somewhere in Skyrim there exists a quiet trade in the sap, its users chasing the vivid dreams it induces. In a land of hardship, perhaps they see those dreams as an escape. This commercialization of something so alien, so potentially dangerous, is deeply Skyrim in spirit. It reflects the world's indifference to mystery, how wonder and horror alike are reduced to trade goods and coin. The sleeping tree then is not just bizarre in its existence, it's bizarre in how casually the world accepts it. The very name sleeping tree implies a state between wakefulness and unconsciousness, a threshold. Some mages speculate that the tree acts as a conduit between Nirn and the dreams of Aetherius. Perhaps those who drink its sap enter not mere hallucinations, but glimpses of another plane of existence. There are whispers of travellers who fell asleep beneath its roots and never woke up again. Others awoke days later, speaking of vast forests of light, endless skies, and the voice of a great tree, whispering in a language no mortal tongue could speak. If true, this makes the sleeping tree not just a plant, but a living portal, one that connects Skyrim's physical world with its spiritual or cosmic dimensions. And if it is dreaming, then perhaps in some strange way, all of Skyrim dreams with it as well. It's ironic that Skyrim's most bizarre phenomenon lies so close to its most familiar city. Whiterun, the heart of trade and politics, stands as a symbol of normalness in Skyrim. Its walls are safe, its people proud, its leadership stable compared to the chaos elsewhere. Yet just beyond these walls, in the plains where mammoths wander, grows a tree that defies all natural law. It's as though the two coexist in deliberate contrast. Whiterun represents the mortal world, stable, rational, and civilized, while the sleeping tree embodies the cosmic, and unknowable. Every day, merchants, soldiers, and travellers pass within sight of its faint purple glow, never questioning its presence. It is the bizarre hiding in plain sight. The sleeping tree is one of Skyrim's greatest enigmas, a living contradiction that blurs the line between plant, god, and dream. It stands in quiet defiance of explanation, its roots sunk deep into the bones of the world, its branches reaching towards something beyond mortal comprehension. In a land defined by war and prophecy, it reminds us that not all mysteries can be solved, and not all beauty is meant to be understood. Maybe the tree really does dream, and maybe when we stand beneath it, we dream with it. Whatever its truth, the sleeping tree remains Skyrim's most mysterious and bizarre place, an alien heart beating quietly beneath the open sky, whispering to anyone who dares listen that the world of men is smaller, stranger, and far more magical than they will ever know. In a world as cruel and unpredictable as Skyrim, luck can mean everything. It determines who survives a dragon's attack, who escapes a collapsing cave, who finds gold in a chest instead of a dragon's curse. Yet for one man, luck was both his name and his undoing. His name was Lucky Lorenz, a seemingly ordinary Nord whose story ends not in glorious battle or heroic sacrifice, but beneath the crushing weight of a fallen tree. He was not a warrior, nor a mage, nor a thief. He was just a man, and his death, frozen forever in one small cabin by the river, has become one of Skyrim's strangest and most quietly tragic tales. Lucky Lorenz embodies the dark humour and quiet melancholy that run beneath Skyrim's vast landscape. His story, though only hinted at through environmental clues, reveals more about the nature of fate, irony, and human fragility than some of the game's longest quests. In the shadow of his ruined home, we are reminded that in Skyrim, as in life, luck is not protection, it's temptation. Lucky Lorenz's cabin lies just south of Ivarstead, nestled beside the river that winds its way toward Lake Gear. At first glance, it looks like any other homestead, a simple log structure with a small dock, a few crates, and the faint remnants of a peaceful life. But as you approach it, it becomes clear that something terrible has happened here. The roof has collapsed, the chimney shattered, and most strikingly, a massive fallen tree has smashed through the cabin, crushing its owner beneath. Lorenz's body still lies there, twisted awkwardly and splintered with wood and debris. There is not really a lot of blood, no signs of struggle, no bandit attack, just the quiet, terrible stillness of an accident. Next to his body lies his journal, and within its pages we find the hint of a man who may have been running from something, or perhaps towards something. The irony of his name, Lucky Lorenz, strikes you immediately. It's as though fate itself mocked him, allowing him to believe in fortune right up until it crushed him beneath a tree. Lorenz's journal is short, but rich with subtext. It tells us he was not a farmer or a hunter, but a scavenger, a man who found a ring and a small fortune of coins and supplies. His words carry optimism, perhaps even pride, as though luck had finally favoured him. His life of hardship, wandering, and risk seemed to have paid off. He had a home, a river, and a bit of wealth. His final entry speaks of his intent to settle down, to live quietly and enjoy his newfound luck. And then, as if to prove that Skyrim is no place for dreamers, the tree fell. The player never learns exactly how it happened. Was it a storm, a dragon's passing shadow, a careless strike of his own axe? The ambiguity only deepens the tragedy. Lucky Lorenz's optimism becomes his curse. He named himself after fortune, and fortune punished his arrogance. Few locations in Skyrim tell such a complete story without dialogue or quests. Lucky Lorenz's cabin is a masterclass in environmental storytelling. Every detail, from the angle of the fallen tree to the scattered furniture, tells you something about his final moments. His bed is crushed, his belongings, a handful of books, a few bottles, and his lucky ring remain untouched. His small boat still rests peacefully by the dock, implying that he had been living here comfortably, unaware of the danger looming just above him. The tree's placement feels almost deliberate, as if nature itself conspired against him. It's not a battlefield, it's not a bandit raid, it's an accident. The cruelest, most mundane kind of death in a land obsessed with destiny and glory. The tragedy of Lucky Lorenz stands out precisely because it is so ordinary. While heroes fight dragons and kings wage wars, he simply dies, forgotten, unlucky, and utterly human. Before settling near Iverstead, Lorenz was likely a wanderer. His journal and possessions suggest a man who made his living scavenging, exploring, and surviving off what he found. Perhaps he once delved into caves for treasures, fought off bandits, or sold goods in small villages. The gold and ring he mentions could have come from any number of Skyrim's countless ruins. But more importantly, it suggests a dreamer. Someone who believed that fortune could be earned through persistence, not birthright. And for a moment, it worked. He had carved out a life for himself away from the chaos of cities and wars. His little cabin was a place of peace, a rare comfort in a world of constant struggle. But Skyrim doesn't reward peace, it devours it. The same wilderness that gave Lorenz a home eventually claimed his life. His story becomes a metaphor for the futility of trying to find safety in a land that rejects it. The Elder Scrolls universe is filled with irony, but Lucky Lorenz's fate might be the purest example of it. His name, his optimism, his newfound wealth, all of it leads to a death that feels both absurd and inevitable. It's the kind of dark humour that defines Skyrim's world, a place where the dragons can burn cities to the ground, but one unlucky man is killed by a tree. Players often chuckle when they find him. After all, it's easy to see the humour in a man named Lucky, crushed by fate itself. But beneath that humour lies a deeper commentary on Skyrim's relationship with destiny. So much of the game's world revolves around control. The Dragonborn's control over shouts, over dragons, over fate. Yet Lucky Lorenz reminds us that not everyone in Skyrim gets to be a hero. Most are at the mercy of forces they can't see or understand. His death is funny because it's meaningless, and that meaninglessness is terrifying. The fallen tree that killed Lorenz represents something powerful, the indifference of nature. In Skyrim, nature is both beautiful and cruel. The mountains inspire awe, but they also hide frostbite and death. Rivers provide life, but they also sweep travellers away. Wolves, bears, and saber cats roam freely, indifferent to the wars of men. Lorenz's death wasn't an act of malice or destiny. It was nature doing what it does. Trees fall, storms rage, life ends. This brutal honesty is part of Skyrim's charm. Unlike the grand destinies of heroes, the world's small tragedies remind us that not everything happens for a reason. Lucky Lorenz didn't die to teach a lesson or fulfill a prophecy. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And perhaps that's the most human fate of all. It's strange how often Skyrim's darkest moments are wrapped in humour. The name Lucky Lorenz alone feels like a cruel joke written by the gods, or by Bethesda's developers who seem to delight in blending tragedy with irony. But this dark humour gives the world depth. It mirrors the absurdity of real life, where bad luck strikes the good and undeserving. The juxtaposition between Lorenz's name and fate becomes more than a punchline. It's a meditation on the way Skyrim's world treats its inhabitants. The Dragonborn may defy death and reshape the world, but the common people, the Lorenzes, the Anises, the Nafi of Iverstead, live and die in obscurity. Lucky Lorenz is a reminder that humour and sorrow often coexist. His story makes players laugh at first, then think later. And that emotional duality is what makes Skyrim's storytelling so enduring. There is a loneliness to Lucky Lorenz's death that sets it apart. No one mourns him, no one speaks his name, his body remains unburied, visited only by curious travellers who happen upon his cabin. The journal and Lucky Ring are the only testaments to his existence. This loneliness reflects a theme that runs through Skyrim's wilderness, the forgotten dead. From the skeletons in mountain caves to the ghosts in the barrows, the land is littered with stories like his. Yet Lorenz's tale stands out because of its normalcy. He wasn't a soldier who fell in battle or a mage consumed by his own magic. He was just a man who wanted a home. His death is the purest expression of how Skyrim forgets its people. Amid dragons and Daedra, there is no space for the unlucky and unimportant. Lucky Lorenz never sought glory. He wasn't part of prophecy, a rebellion, or a guild. Yet his story lingers in players' minds precisely because it resists meaning. He is the most unlucky NPC in all of Skyrim, not because he was evil or foolish, but because he was human. His death captures the strange beauty of Skyrim's world, a place where fate can crush you without warning, and where even the smallest stories can echo louder than the shouts of dragons. In a land obsessed with destiny, Lucky Lorenz reminds us of the cruel randomness of life, and the quiet dignity of those who never got the chance to be heroes. Skyrim is a land that constantly tries to grab your attention. Dragons circle overhead, cities tower over the tundra, ancient ruins promise treasure and danger beneath every mountain. But sometimes the most interesting places in Skyrim are the ones that don't truly stand out. They blend into the landscape, they look ordinary, they quietly wait for someone curious enough to notice. One of the best examples of this is Pine Watch. At first glance, Pine Watch is nothing more than a small shack, sitting peacefully in the forests of the Falkreath Hold. It looks like dozens of other cabins scattered across Skyrim's wilderness, a place where a lone hunter might live quietly, far away from the chaos of the cities. Most players ride past it without a second thought, but beneath that unremarkable little house lies one of Skyrim's most surprising secrets, a hidden criminal operation, an underground hideout, and a quiet connection to the powerful Thieves' Guild of Riften. Pine Watch may look forgettable, but that is exactly the point. Pine Watch sits just west of Helgen and north of the road that winds to Falkreath. The surrounding forest is dense and quiet, filled with towering pines and the distant sounds of wildlife. In other words, it's the perfect place for a secluded home. When you first arrive, the shack seems completely normal. The cabin contains the typical items you might expect: a bed, a table, a cooking pot, and a few scattered belongings. Nothing about it screams danger. Nothing suggests hidden tunnels or criminal conspiracies. And that is exactly why Pine Watch works so well. Because Skyrim is full of shacks like this. Hunter cabins, abandoned houses, small farms. They are everywhere. Players become accustomed to them and stop questioning what might be hidden inside. Pine Watch relies on that assumption. It disguises itself as something mundane in a world where players have learned to ignore the mundane itself. The true nature of Pine Watch reveals itself only if the player begins to explore more carefully. Hidden within the shack is a concealed passage leading underground. Behind the innocent-looking cabin lies Pine Watch Bandit Sanctuary, a sprawling hideout filled with criminals, traps, and stolen goods. Suddenly, the quiet cabin transforms itself into something much more sinister. What looked like a peaceful home is actually the entrance to an entire underground operation. Bandits move through the tunnels below, guarding treasure and maintaining a secret base far away from the eyes of Skyrim's authorities. It's a clever twist. Many Skyrim dungeons begin with dramatic ruins or imposing caves. Pine Watch begins with a humble wooden door and a small chimney puffing smoke into the forest air. It doesn't look like an entrance to anything important, which is exactly why no one suspects it. The importance of Pine Watch becomes clearer during the Thieves' Guild questline, particularly the quest Silver Lining. During this mission, the player is sent to recover a valuable silver mold from Pine Watch, revealing that the hideout is connected to criminal networks operating across Skyrim. This small shack in the forest is not just a random bandit camp. It is part of a much larger system. The Thieves' Guild, despite being headquartered in Riften far to the east, maintains influence throughout the province. Pine Watch acts as one of their quiet outposts, a place where stolen goods can be hidden, guarded, and moved without attracting attention. In other words, Pine Watch is a piece of Skyrim's underground economy. And yet, if you never join the Thieves Guild, you might never learn that at all. At the centre of Pine Watch's operation is Regal Strongarm, the woman who lives in the shack above. At first, she seems harmless, just another NPC occupying a remote cabin. But if you venture deeper into the sanctuary below, her true identity becomes clear. Regal is the leader of the bandits operating beneath Pine Watch. The peaceful resident upstairs is actually the mastermind of the entire hideout. This dual identity adds an extra layer of intrigue to the location. Regal's role perfectly reflects Pine Watch itself, an ordinary surface hiding something much darker below. She lives above ground, maintaining the illusion of a simple life, while commanding a network of criminals beneath the forest floor. It's a quiet deception, one that mirrors the subtle storytelling Bethesda often hides within Skyrim's world. What makes Pine Watch particularly impressive is the scale of what lies beneath it. The underground sanctuary is far larger than the small shack above suggests. It contains multiple chambers, living areas, and defensive positions filled with bandits guarding their territory. Traps line the corridors, enemies patrol the halls, loot is scattered throughout the rooms. It feels like a full dungeon, one that players would normally expect to find beneath an ancient ruin or a massive cave entrance. Instead, it's hidden under a single wooden cabin. That contrast is what makes this place so memorable for the players who actually discover it. The realization that something so large could exist beneath something so small creates a sense of wonder, and perhaps a little paranoia about what else might be hidden across Skyrim. Pine Watch's location in the Falkreath Hold is also significant. Falkreath is known for its forests, its graveyard, and its quiet atmosphere. Compared to cities like Markarth or Windhelm, it feels calm and remote. But that calm hides many secrets. Bandit camps dot the surrounding woods. Necromancers experiment in hidden caves. Dark Brotherhood assassins once operated nearby. Pine Watch fits perfectly into this landscape of hidden danger. It reflects the idea that Falkreath's forests are not as peaceful as they seem. Beneath the trees and mist lie criminals, conspiracies, and forgotten stories waiting to be uncovered. The shack at Pine Watch is simply one more secret buried in the woods. Despite its hidden complexity, Pine Watch remains one of the most unnoticed locations in Skyrim. There are several reasons for this. First, it lacks visual spectacle. There are no towering ruins or dramatic landmarks drawing players towards it. Second, it sits in a forested area that players often pass through quickly while travelling between cities. Thirdly, its entrance looks identical to dozens of other cabins scattered across the province. Players become conditioned to expect nothing special from these small buildings. After exploring a few hunter cabins and finding nothing interesting, they stop checking. Pine Watch takes advantage of that habit. It hides its secrets in plain sight. One of Skyrim's greatest strengths is its use of environmental storytelling, the ability to tell stories through locations rather than dialogue. Pine Watch is a perfect example of this. The shack above tells one story, a quiet life in the woods. The sanctuary below tells another, a network of bandits living and working together in secret. By combining these two layers, the game creates a subtle narrative without needing long conversations or expositions. Players who only glance at the shack see nothing unusual. Players who explore deeper uncover an entire hidden world. This layered design rewards curiosity, a key theme throughout Skyrim's exploration. Skyrim is often remembered for its grand moments, dragon battles, ancient prophecies, and epic quests. But the world's true magic lies in its quiet discoveries. A forgotten campsite, a hidden cave, or a simple wooden shack in the forest that turns out to be something far more dangerous than it appears. Pine Watch reminds us that exploration is not just about chasing markers on a map. It's about curiosity. It's about stepping inside the unremarkable cabin and wondering what might be hidden behind the walls. Because sometimes the most unnoticeable place in all of Skyrim is hiding the biggest secret of all. And Pine Watch has been keeping its secret for a very long time. Skyrim is a land built on anticipation. You see a ruin in the distance and imagine ancient secrets hidden beneath its stones. You discover a cave entrance carved into the mountainside and expect danger waiting in the dark. Every location in Skyrim feels like the beginning of a story. Some caves lead to sprawling underground cities. Some contain powerful artifacts. Others hide forgotten lore that expands the entire history of Tamriel. Because of this, players naturally learn to associate caves with reward, discovery, adventure. But every once in a while, Skyrim breaks that expectation. And no location demonstrates that better than Broken Helm Hollow. At first glance, it looks like any other dungeon in the province. A cave entrance carved into the rocky hills south of Riften. A name that sounds dangerous, the promise of bandits, treasure and hidden secrets. But once you step inside, something becomes clear almost immediately. Broken Helm Hollow is not what you expected. In fact, it might be the most underwhelming cave in all of Skyrim. The first strange thing about Broken Helm Hollow is its name. Broken Helm sounds dramatic. It suggests a battlefield, a fallen warrior, or some forgotten tragedy buried beneath a stone. In a game where location names often hint at deeper lore, places like Bleak Falls Barrow or Labyrinthian, players naturally assume there must be a story here. But Broken Helm Hollow never quite delivers on that promise. The cave sits in the hills south of Riften, tucked quietly between forests and rocky outcrops. It's not particularly hidden, but it's also not along the main roads most players travel. You might discover it while wandering through the rift, or you might only visit it after receiving a Radiant quest. Either way, the entrance gives the impression that something meaningful waits inside. But once you enter the cave, that illusion quickly begins to fade. Like many caves in Skyrim, Broken Helm Hollow is occupied by bandits. Bandits are one of the most common enemy types in the game. They fill forts, caves, ruins, and abandoned towers across the province. And while they can be fun to fight, they rarely create memorable experiences on their own. Broken Helm Hollow is no exception. Inside the cave, players encounter a small group of bandits using the location as a hideout. They've built makeshift camps, placed torches along the cave walls, and scattered supplies throughout the tunnels. It's exactly what you would expect from a standard bandit den. There are no unique enemy types, no unusual combat mechanics, no elaborate traps or puzzles. Just a handful of enemies guarding a cave that feels almost identical to dozens of others across Skyrim. And that's where the first sense of disappointment appears. One of the most memorable aspects of Skyrim's best dungeons is mystery. Bleak Falls Barrow introduces ancient Nordic puzzles and dragon lore. Blackreach reveals a massive underground ecosystem. Even smaller caves often hide journals or environmental storytelling that hints at deeper narratives. Broken Helm Hollow lacks almost all of that. There are no elaborate ruins, no lost civilizations, no strange magical experiments hidden in the shadows. The cave is simply just a cave. Its tunnels twist through stone walls that look nearly identical to countless other locations in the game. Its rooms contain crates, bedrolls, and campfires, the standard decorations of a bandit hideout. Nothing about the environment suggests that anything unusual ever happened here. And without that sense of mystery, the cave begins to feel strangely forgettable. Broken Helm Hollow does include one small narrative detail. Inside the cave, players can find a captive prisoner locked in a cage. It's one of the few places he might be. This prisoner is usually part of a Radiant rescue quest, meaning the game randomly selects the location when an NPC asks you to save someone. At first, this might seem like it might add depth to the cave's story. After all, prisoners imply conflict. Conflict suggests narrative, but in practice, the interaction is extremely simple. You unlock the cage, the prisoner thanks you, and then they leave. There's no elaborate dialogue, no dramatic revelation, no hidden twists that changes how you see the location. The rescue happens quickly and quietly, leaving the cave feeling just as ordinary as it was before. To understand why Broken Helm Hollow feels so underwhelming, it helps to look at Skyrim's Radiant quest system. Bethesda designed Skyrim with hundreds of locations that could be used interchangeably for certain quests. Bandit camps, caves, forts. The game randomly assigns these locations to missions like bounty hunts or rescue operations. This system allows Skyrim to generate endless quests, but it also means that some locations were designed primarily as generic quest spaces rather than unique experiences. Broken Helm Hollow fits perfectly into that category. It exists less as a meaningful place in the world and more as a stage where Radiant quests can occur. A cave designed for functionality rather than storytelling. Even the physical design of Broken Helm Hollow contributes to its reputation. The cave is relatively small. Its layout is straightforward. Players move through a short series of tunnels before reaching the main chamber where the bandit leader resides. After that, the cave just ends. There are no secret passages, no branching paths, no hidden chambers waiting to be discovered. Compared to Skyrim's more complex dungeons, Broken Helm Hollow feels almost unfinished. Not broken in a technical sense, but broken in the sense that it never evolves beyond its simple design. Another reason the cave feels so underwhelming is its rewards. Skyrim often motivates exploration with unique items or valuable treasure. Players enter dangerous ruins hoping to find powerful weapons, enchanted armor, or rare artifacts. But Broken Helm Hollow offers very little in that regard. The bandit leader carries standard equipment. The chests contain typical loot. Nothing about the rewards feel particularly special, which means that by the time you leave the cave, you may not feel like you've discovered anything meaningful at all. Just another small encounter in a world full of them. Perhaps the biggest problem with Broken Helm Hollow is how easily it disappears from memory. Skyrim is filled with hundreds of locations, and many of them stand out because of something distinctive. A strange puzzle, a dramatic boss fight, a piece of lore that changes how you view the world. Broken Helm Hollow lacks that defining moment. It doesn't surprise you, it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't reveal anything new about Skyrim's history. It simply exists. And in a game as massive as Skyrim, that might be the most dangerous thing a location can do. Because places that don't stand out are the ones players forget entirely. And yet Broken Helm Hollow still teaches us something interesting about Skyrim's design. Even though the cave itself is simple, it contributes to the illusion that Skyrim is a living world. Not every location can be legendary. Not every cave can hide ancient secrets. Some places exist simply because people needed somewhere to live, hide, or survive. From that perspective, Broken Helm Hollow begins to make more sense. It isn't meant to be extraordinary. It's meant to feel like a small temporary shelter used by outlaws trying to avoid the law itself. A minor detail in a much larger world. Broken Helm Hollow may never become one of Skyrim's most famous locations. It doesn't contain ancient magic, it doesn't hide powerful artifacts, and it certainly doesn't challenge the Dragonborn in any meaningful way. But in a strange way, that's what makes it interesting, because it reminds us that Skyrim's world is larger than its biggest moments. For every legendary ruin or epic quest, there are dozens of small places quietly filling the spaces between them. Caves used by bandits, shelters forgotten by history, locations that players enter once and then never think about again. Broken Helm Hollow is one of those places, underwhelming, forgettable, but still part of the vast world that makes Skyrim feel real. And sometimes the most ordinary places reveal just as much about a world as the legendary ones. Skyrim is a game filled with legendary discoveries. You can uncover ancient dragon priests buried beneath forgotten temples. You can descend into the glowing abyss of Blackreach. You can walk the halls of Sovereign itself. The province is full of grand stories, but hidden beneath those epic moments are hundreds of details that serve absolutely no practical purpose at all. Tiny mechanics, strange behaviours, facts so obscure they barely matter. They won't make you stronger, they won't help you defeat Alduin. Most of them won't even appear in your quest journal, because why would they? And yet they exist quietly inside the game's massive world, for every dragonborn to overlook. Little pieces of design that players stumble across accidentally. Some are funny, some are strange, some are so oddly specific that you begin to wonder why the developers included them at all. But strangely enough, they reveal just how detailed the world of Skyrim really is. One of the most famous facts in Skyrim involves one of its smallest creatures, the humble chicken. If you attack a chicken in a town, something strange happens. The entire settlement may suddenly turn hostile. Blacksmiths, guards, farmers, merchants, everyone nearby might attempt to kill you. At first glance, it seems absurd. Why would an entire village risk their lives over a single chicken? But behind the scenes, the answer is surprisingly simple. Chickens are technically flagged as owned property within the game's crime system. When you attack one, the game treats it as an act of theft or assault. And because many towns treat livestock as valuable resources, the entire population reacts as if you've committed a serious crime. It's not a dramatic mechanic, it doesn't affect the story, but it has confused players for over a decade. And for many new adventurers, the first real enemy they ever create in Skyrim is a chicken. Considering the Dragonborn can defeat dragons, master ancient magic, and shout enemies off cliffs, you might expect them to be an excellent swimmer. But strangely, they are not. In fact, Skyrim's swimming mechanics are incredibly limited. You cannot attack underwater, you cannot cast most spells underwater, and if you attempt to fight aquatic enemies like slaughterfish, you're forced to awkwardly swing your weapon at the surface. Even more strange is the fact that Skyrim contains very few underwater secrets compared to other Bethesda games. There are the occasional sunken chests or shipwrecks, but the ocean surrounding Skyrim is largely empty, which makes swimming one of the least useful abilities in the entire game. It exists, but it rarely matters. The sweet roll is one of Skyrim's most iconic foods, mostly because of a line of dialogue repeated by countless guards. Let me guess, someone stole your sweet roll. I'm sure you've heard it plenty. It's become a meme across the entire Elder Scrolls community, but the strange part is that the sweet roll theft actually interacts with Skyrim's crime system. If you steal food from an NPC's home, the game quietly logs that action, and if you're caught, the owner may react as though you've stolen something meaningful. In reality, sweet rolls restore a tiny amount of health and serve almost no strategic purpose. They are one of the least useful foods in the entire game, yet somehow they've become one of the most recognisable symbols of Skyrim. A useless item turned legendary through repetition. Every Skyrim player eventually has the same experience. You see a giant standing near a mammoth, you decide to attack, and seconds later you're launched into the sky. What many players don't realise is that giants were originally designed more like environmental obstacles than enemies. They have extremely high damage output and massive health pools compared to early game characters. In other words, they're meant to be avoided, but the physics engine introduces something unusual. If a giant's attack connects in a specific way, it can send the player flying hundreds of feet into the air. This bug became so iconic that Bethesda never fully removed it. Instead, it quietly became one of the game's most famous moments. Technically useless, but unforgettable. One of the strangest things in all of Skyrim isn't something you can actually find in the game. because it was removed before release. Hidden in Skyrim's unused files is evidence that Bethesda once planned to include an arena in Windhelm. The idea was simple. Players would enter the arena and fight a series of increasingly difficult opponents, slowly climbing the ranks until eventually becoming the champion of the arena. If that concept sounds familiar, it's because Bethesda had already done something similar in Oblivion. The Imperial City Arena was one of the most memorable side activities in the game, so bringing it back in Skyrim would have actually made sense. But the most interesting part of this cut feature wasn't the arena itself, it was how you got there. Some unused dialogue suggests that the Windhelm Arena was originally tied to the city's jail system. Instead of simply sitting in a cell to serve your sentence, prisoners would choose another option: fight. The idea was that inmates could enter the arena and battle other prisoners, like a gulag, as a way of earning their freedom. And when you think about it for a moment, it raises a pretty obvious problem. Because if someone is already in jail for committing a violent crime, letting them go free simply because they killed another prisoner probably isn't the smartest legal system. Which might explain why Bethesda eventually decided to remove the entire mechanic from the game. Still, the concept itself is fascinating. It suggests that Windhelm, already one of the harshest cities in Skyrim, might have had an even darker side. A place where justice wasn't about rehabilitation, it was about survival. Of course, like many pieces of cut content in Bethesda games, the story doesn't quite end there, because modders eventually stepped in and finished the arena themselves. Using the leftover files, scripts, and dialogue, they rebuilt the system Bethesda originally planned, which means the Windhelm Arena technically still exists, just not in the official version of the game. And in a strange way, that becomes a pattern for Bethesda titles. Entire mechanics get cut during development, and the community quietly puts them back together. Some of Skyrim's most interesting facts aren't about mechanics or glitches. They're about people. And one of the most mysterious characters in the entire game is someone most players meet very early in the Thieves Guild, Sapphire. She's a woman who doesn't really talk that much, and she gives fewer explanations as well. Most of the time, she keeps conversations short, cold, and guarded, and it's clear almost immediately that she doesn't trust easily. But if you start digging into Skyrim's lore, a surprising amount of information about her slowly begins to appear. According to Skyrim's official game guide, Sapphire was once in the Dark Brotherhood. At some point in her past, she walked away from the assassins, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because she wanted something else: money. Sapphire eventually joined the Thieves Guild, where wealth and opportunity mattered far more than loyalty or ideology. But her story doesn't end there. When the Dragonborn expansion was released, Bethesda quietly added another layer to her past. On the island off from Skyrim, players can meet a blacksmith named Glover Mallory. If the name sounds familiar, that's because Glover is actually the brother of Dalvin Mallory, one of the Thieves Guild's leaders back in Riften. At first, the connection seems minor, just another family link hidden somewhere in Skyrim's massive world. But there's more to it, because Glover Mallory has a daughter, and that daughter is Sapphire, which means that Dalvin Mallory, the man who helps run the Thieves Guild, is unknowingly Sapphire's uncle. This information is never directly explained in dialogue. Instead, the truth is hidden inside Glover's home. In the basement of his house on the island, you can find a letter addressed to Sapphire. The note reveals the entire story. Glover knows she's alive. He knows who she became. And despite everything, he still hopes she might one day return. If you bring this letter back to Sapphire and Riften, something unusual happens. For the first time, her cold personality cracks. She thanks you, genuinely, and in return, she gives you a unique reward. An exquisite sapphire. It's not a powerful artifact. It's not a legendary weapon, but it's one of the rare moments in Skyrim where a character's hidden past actually changes how they treat you. Most secrets in Skyrim are scripted events or simple Easter eggs, but Sapphire's story feels different because it isn't about treasure or combat. It's about a family that was quietly broken apart long before the Dragonborn ever arrived. And unless you explore both Skyrim and Solstheim carefully, you might never realise the connection exists at all. None of these facts will help you defeat Alduin. They won't make your armor stronger. They won't unlock hidden quest lines. Most of them exist quietly in the background of Skyrim's enormous world. But that's what exactly makes them interesting. They reveal the strange complexity behind the game's design, the tiny systems, the unexpected interactions, the odd behaviours that emerge when a massive open world game tries to simulate life. Skyrim is remembered for its dragons, its battles, and its epic landscapes. But sometimes the most memorable moments come from things that barely matter at all. A flying giant, a stolen sweet roll, a secretive woman, a bucket placed over a shopkeeper's head. Useless facts, but somehow the details players remember the most.